Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us on a special episode of the Cheyenne Hills Podcast. Sometimes there are issues we feel are especially relevant or important to our community and want to take extra time to talk about it. We hope it's helpful and enjoyable.
Across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the special edition podcast. We have some special guests in here today, and we're talking about the K through 6th grade curriculum, Wit and Wisdom. And today I have in studio with us is Mr. Jim Fraley, Assistant Superintendent of Instruction. Jim, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Galen. It's a pleasure being here.
It's good to have you.
Hi, René.
René Minder, Executive Minister at Cheyenne Hills Church. René, thanks for being here. And Nathan Winters is here. You just can't see him. He is on. He's on the phone. He's out of town. So Nathan, can you say hi?
Yes, it's good to be with you. Thank you very much.
I'm Galen Huck, lead pastor here at Cheyenne Hills Church, and honestly, we've been talking about this Wit and Wisdom. I want to talk a little bit about how we got involved a little bit, but I think the first thing I'd like to lead off with, Jim, is I'd like to hear from you. What is Wit and Wisdom, and why Wit and Wisdom here in Cheyenne? Cheyenne.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Good to have you
in this capacity. So Wit and Wisdom, it's been a bit of a journey. It seems like it's been in our district for years now, but it's only been a few months that we've been actually implementing it since August. The board approved it because we saw high demand. We had an epidemic of sorts, not the COVID epidemic, but a literacy epidemic. Right. And we realized that half of our students were on grade level in reading, and knowing that we needed new materials. We needed to do something different to help our students achieve in reading, in writing, listening, speaking, just thinking skills as well. And so our team in the district, put together by our administrators, our teachers, board members, of course, are involved as well, put together a committee to try to look at some different programs out there that have had some success in raising student achievement in literacy. And so we had a robust system at the time. We'd been using it for several years. I still remember back in the mid-'90s when I became a teacher in Cheyenne, and I had a basal reader, and I got to pick and choose the stories that I'd share with the students and then assess them on their comprehension and their vocabulary through a basal reader. It was basically just a snippet of a story, and then they'd answer their questions. And I thought I was a great teacher because I got 70% of my kids reading. Well, what I failed to know is that the science of reading has changed so much since then. And we needed to do something to help our students think better, comprehend at higher levels. We knew we had a gap in kindergarten, first, second, third grade in phonics and phonemic awareness. And so we tried to take a look at our needs, first of all, and then to look at what else is out there. There are many, hundreds, maybe thousands of materials out there that we could pare down to try to meet the needs of students on a higher level of reading and writing and speaking and listening. But there are also so many constraints that we have living in Wyoming as well. The history of English language learning, the state standards, the culture, the readiness, the preparedness, what we have in place, and the resources and tools for that it really did evolve into a comprehensive look at what we need. Okay. And so we started with that, the demand, and then we looked into what else is out there, what works with our current system that's not so different than what we have in place. And we landed with several programs that we looked at in the committee last year.
And Wit and Wisdom was the one that everyone has selected, obviously.
We did. We used a criteria, and it aligned with our standards. It aligned with the phonemic awareness and phonics program that we currently have in place. Okay. Because Wit and Wisdom is not aligned to the standards of dyslexia, teaching how to decode strategies, and for students to, when they come across a difficult word, what are those systems they can tackle that word to not only pronounce it, decode it, but also to understand it.
One of the things that we discovered, I've learned, is the process and how that process works. And it's actually the process that Wit and Wisdom uses. This is my assessment of it. It's much like what we do in teaching kids scripture, for example. It has you read the story, but then you maybe unpack that story's vocabulary words, and then you unpack the maybe we act it out. I remember when I started off in ministry with junior high kids, we used to act out the Good Samaritan, for example, right? And when kids get involved in that Good Samaritan and they play different roles in it, then you talk to them about playing that role. It's powerful. Wit and Wisdom does that. And so one of the goals, this is the goal for me, is I want parents in our church to understand what the curriculum is and be aware of that. And also I want them to understand the way it's being taught, because this is a very powerful tool, whether it's a virtuous ideal or whether it's one that someone would consider not virtuous. Okay. And there's some concerns. I want to bring those up, but whatever concept is being taught, Wit and Wisdom, this is my takeaway, and you can tell me if you think it's right or wrong, but I think Wit and Wisdom is going to drive that very deep inside of this child's heart and their mind. And that's it's a good thing, but it's also a concerning thing, depending on what the curriculum is. And so those are some of the questions that I have had and that I've kind of discovered. So I think we were talking earlier. One of the reason that I got involved in this, I didn't go looking for this. I'll just be honest with you. This is not a lot of people don't believe this is the pastor's lane, and I understand that. And it's not a lane I necessarily am looking for. However, teachers would come to me and say, Galen, I'd like for you to be praying for me about if there's something I'm teaching in school and I'm just not comfortable. I'd like for you to pray with me. It's like, okay. And after 2 or 3 of those, I said, okay, you guys tell me what you're talking about. And so they'd send me snippets or whatever. Well, then they're not here now, but I've got about probably 30 or 40 books from Wit and Wisdom that are kids from kindergarten through 6th grade. I've read some of them. You actually, when we met earlier, René and I and Jim and Eric Jackson met a month or so ago. Right. And one of the things you asked me to do is like, have you read some of the more virtuous ones? And I said, well, no, I hadn't. So I appreciate you. Send me those. Sure. And read through those. It was good. So I know there are virtuous books in this Wit and Wisdom. There's some that have some concerns, and those are the ones that teachers those are the ones I saw, right? And so, and I could see, it's like, wow, yeah, I'm concerned. That's why we set up a meeting a month ago, and I so appreciate you guys taking time to sit down with us. You didn't need to do that, and I appreciate you doing that. We also sat down with Roseanne René, who's the chairman of the school board, and talked to her about some of these same things, same concerns. And I asked both Eric and Roseanne to be here, but they couldn't this time. It may be sometime in the future, and they appreciated us asking. So it's teachers' concerns that got me involved in this. And it's like, well, now that I see some of the content and some of their concerns, now I feel like I'm a steward of this information, and I couldn't just let it sit on my desk. So I came to you and said, guys, what do you see here? And but also, I feel like I've got to. And I told you the verse that was really sticking in my mind is Matthew 18:6. And Jesus said this. He said, "If anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and be drowned at the depths of the sea." And I stood in Capernaum, and I saw this millstone. It's massive. It is not a flotation device. Mm-hmm. And when I think about this, and I think of there are some things that are being taught to kids that, from my point of view, it's like as a parent, as a grandparent, would have some concerns as a pastor. Mm. And so that's the reason I'm in this lane. Whether I should be or not, everyone's going to have a different opinion on that, and I don't know the answer to it. So I'm going to try to be as good a steward as I possibly can with this. But even the Good Samaritan story, it has 2 pastor types that pass by the guy, right? Mm-hmm. And there's teachers that are in our church that I feel like I know I'm their shepherd, and they've got concerns. And so that's what's gotten me to this point. Mm-hmm. And I so appreciate you being here and helping us kind of to work through and maybe hopefully find some solutions on the other end of this that can be real workable. Because like I say, I know the why of the school is that to raise the reading level. Absolutely agree with that. And I also know you have a Wit and Wisdom system here that whatever is being taught is going to be really driven deep into that child's heart and their mind. So here's 3 concerns that have come out, and we can talk about them, or I'm just going to hit them. But I would say that most everything comes down to age appropriateness. Mm-hmm. That's the core. And I would want our people out there to know this, like, because these are some of these are classic books, that you've taught. You've told me you've taught these books and everything. But the age appropriateness is a big question. Mm-hmm. And when anybody starts talking about, well, this is good and this is good, it's like, great. But it's what grade level is that being taught at? And you find out it's a 2nd grade level. It's like, I think that's a concern. Mm-hmm. It's something I want our people to know. Mm-hmm. The dark topics. And this is probably my biggest concern, Jim. And I remember we talked about this before, but the suicide ideation, I've done any suicide funeral is too many. I've been involved in a lot of them, and anything. And so, granted, I may be a little hypersensitive, but when I see there's a book that talks about a rope being wrapped around a person's neck and hanging them from the tree, it's like, why is that even mentioned in a 3rd grade book ever? The Bold Irene, we talked about this one. Remember, she's taken this dress to her, I don't know, someplace, and her mom made this beautiful dress, and she boldly takes this in through the wind and the weather and all this other stuff, and then she falls into the snowbank, and there's one paragraph there that she goes, well, what if I just stay? She's tired. What if I just stay here? What if I would just die? What if I would just stay buried under the snow? It's like, this is, I think, a 1st grade book, but that's one thing. This is the part that I think that concerns comes from me, because I know how powerful this Wit and Wisdom is. Mm-hmm. And to take this, and one of the key points, this is what really triggered me. I saw in the teacher's manual, in this, and you can look this one up. I'd like for to see it even. But it's one of the points is to act out that particular scene. Mm-hmm. She's bold in a lot of scenes all the way through. Mm-hmm. That's the one that's being asked to act out. Mm-hmm. To me, that's taking a concept and driving it really deep into a heart and a mind of a child. That is concerning to me. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to flag some books and how to bring our concerns, because I think those are some things that need to be talked about. Mm-hmm. I've talked a lot. You had a little different take, if you want to share that with on Bold Irene, because I know there's some good to it too, but that was my concern.
Sure. Well, thank you. There's a lot there to unpack. I'd first like to thank you for bringing the scripture. Yeah, I appreciate that in my life as well. In Matthew 14, I think 27, fear not, do not be afraid. It is I. And looking at that, inherent trust. Don't be afraid. Inherent trust. We have had that in our public education system for years. We have trusted those principals, those teachers, those parents, and we've lost a sense of trust, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be...
That is so true.
The
everything's rocked right now.
Everything is rocked.
You're right.
Everything is polarized.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And we have to rebuild that. And how do we build that? We seek first to understand.
Yep.
And I think that, when Stephen Covey said that in his book in the 90s was groundbreaking for me, that I always look to first seek to understand, what are our parents seeing? What are they saying to us? What are we saying to them? Let's be transparent in not this reflective window that I could partially see myself in, but that I can see through and they can see through to me.
Right.
And trust each other that we're going to sit down and resolve this issue.
Right. And I hope that we talked about that trust last time too. Yeah. And I hope that this, our time together I hope that can be rebuilt. And because I think it's something that is definitely is lacking.
Yeah,
for sure.
And we're going to get there. We have a new curriculum that has not been put into place. We have a comprehensive core reading program that this district has never done before. And it's new. And it's on the heels of something that we broke a lot of trust. We closed our doors for a number of months and didn't let parents in.
Yeah.
And they wonder, what are you doing with our kids? It also opened their eyes to say, what are our kids learning? Because they were at home with them next to their computers as they tried to work from home. And so when I see that, in a context, and I say, okay, they have a reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
And we have to communicate in ways that they understand what we're trying to do. Now, you mentioned books that have been around for decades. The content has always been there. It's just, how did you present that, Mrs. Smith, the teacher? What are the key learnings? What is this child taking home from them? Right? I remember as a fourth grader when my parents got divorced, I was going through some challenges. I didn't know in the 70s anything about divorce, nor did my friends. It was taboo in my small community.
Right.
But a librarian turned me onto a book that I'd never heard of. It's Your Dad Lives in a Downtown Hotel. And I found solace in that, saying I wasn't different. I was unique in my community, but not in the scope of our society.
Right.
And so when I take a look at certain books out there, when kids are going through natural fears of a snowstorm like Brave Irene, of being lost in the wilderness like Brian Roberson and Hatchet, there's so many rich texts out there, Bud Not Buddy, growing up in the Great Depression, that there's a context now that is evolving through history and coming again that some kids will go through and need to tackle some difficult issues and tough topics. The trust on a teacher to deliver that, to be there for the child, because we educate everybody. We're public educators. We don't turn anybody away.
Right.
And we have to meet the needs of so many diverse learners and so many diverse religions, races. We're public educators. We take everybody in and then we say, what are your needs?
And
what are your strengths?
That's a good point too. And I think one of the reasons, and we talked about this earlier, that, I think, quite frankly, I think the Christian voice has been set us to the side. I mean, our voice hasn't been in public schools for, I don't think, a long time. Whether we're talking about, some of the sexual ideation, some of the, the suicide ideation is really concerning for me. The race, some of the things that are going on with that and how that's being presented. How it's being presented is huge. And I think what my concern is, as I've read some of these books, this is not my words. These are suicide ideologies, the darkness, the depression, the hate, the violence, and the fear throughout the entire curriculum. Now, that person may be extreme, but this is a local person that has read through as a teacher and said, this is what's heavy on my heart. And this is a person they're not a person that, they're a reputable person that's not overstating something. And so these are the concerns that teachers are having. And I'm not kidding, not just one or two. Just had one just the other day. Brand new to the church, didn't know her. I've been talking about revival, and just that, before God awakens a community, He's going to revive a church, and I think He's going to have to revive us. First of all, you have to be vived, right, and then be revived. And so I've been asking God, and I just prayed for God's grace, and one of them I mentioned was curriculum, because it's been on my mind, right? I'm concerned about some of these things are being taught, and she came up to me, and she's brand new to Cheyenne. She's brand new to the school district, and she parroted all the concerns that are right here. And it's like, it's not, and the teachers are saying these things. I don't know if you guys are hearing these things from teachers. Are they saying these things to you? Are they?
They are. And
yeah.
So
I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
each month we send out a survey to all of our teachers, and in kindergarten through 6th, and they provide feedback. Their angst, they provide feedback on what's going well, what's not going well, their pacing, where they're at in the process. And they provide, our last survey, we got over 170 comments. Some of those are positive, some of those are negative. And we keep a database of that, and we organize that in a way where we can comprehend some strong threads of either misinformation, misunderstanding. Maybe it's being deployed differently in their schools or in their grade levels. Maybe there's some mistakes. Maybe there's some books out there that we need to take a serious look at if it's age appropriate for those students. And so we have that process right now that we collecting information, albeit 3 months into this, collecting information from this program. Now, when you go and build a church like this, a beautiful facility, you don't say we're building a DeWalt. We're building a church. We're building readers. We're not building wit and wisdom. And that's another misnomer, that we don't teach wit and wisdom. We teach reading still. And it's just through wit and wisdom that we have that DeWalt tool to build it with. We don't owe anything. We paid the bill to great minds, to Wit and Wisdom. Now we tailor it to our needs. And that's the process that we're involved in right now.
That's really good to hear. And I was talking to Nathan. Nathan, you had some process questions, and I was trying to parrot those questions just a little bit. Can you weigh in or maybe ask your question at this time?
Certainly. Well, I really appreciate what I've heard so far. The kind of dialogue that we are having right now really helps us work together for the sake of our children. And at the end of the day, I agree with what Jim just said. It's about building good children that can carry on what we have inherited from our fathers onto the next generation. And so that's the reason why conversations like these are so important. And so I have kind of paid attention to this kind of conversation. I recall back in 2015, at that time we were debating the context of the ESSA, that was coming through. It was kind of through that conversation regarding the No Child Left Behind, we were transitioning into Every Student Succeeds Act. This was in 2015, toward the end of the Obama administration. And part of that conversation was the discussion of social emotional learning, or SEL. And in that SEL, which, by the way, was left behind in that conversation primarily because the questions that we're facing right now. And it was because in social emotional learning, they're talking about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. But part of that social awareness was where you would have children essentially learning that merely because of their skin color or other things, they are of higher or lesser value. So rather than bringing healing across the racial divides in this country, it seemed to be driving wedges further and further in. And I think part of what has raised this discussion, especially regarding the curriculum we're talking about today, is even in Tennessee, this particular curriculum was turned down twice by their state board before eventually parts of it were implemented just directly through school systems. And so I think parents have shown a lot of concern with this curriculum because of some of its controversial content. And that's why I'm so thankful, Jim, that you're here and willing to talk to, in reality, not just us, but of course, thousands of people who have been paying attention to this conversation in the state of Wyoming. And parents, of course, are seeing more of what their children are learning, and there's growing concern. And we know that this is happening across the country. In Virginia, we found that parents are so dissatisfied with the way administrators are driving curriculum conversation that they've decided to massively overhaul their entire government to inform school administrators that they're not willing to sit on the sidelines when it comes to curriculum and content development. So here's kind of the question. How can parents get more involved? How can they get more involved in the curriculum cycle in education? I've watched this for a few years myself. Around every 5 years, when it's time to reevaluate standards, it seems that what was once held as the best standard in the country 5 years before is now the bad old standard. and so we have to get involved with a better curriculum. So my question is, because of the concerns of parents, how can we get more involved into the process of selecting curriculum? Or is that something that happens within the administrative system of Laramie County School District number 1? That would be my first question.
That's a great question, Nathan, and I appreciate you raising several topics that are pertinent to our daily lives as educators. For one, the social and emotional piece must be addressed before we can actually get to the heart of teaching a child how to read. If a child is hurt physically, hurt emotionally, and hurt socially, they're not worried about if they can read or not. They need to have those needs met. And so that's where teachers come into play, as well as school counselors, as well as administrators, on why are you hurting? Is it because you didn't have breakfast today? Is it because you feel ill? Icky? Is your tummy icky? You remember those conversations with your own kids. And first of all, we meet those social and emotional and physical needs before we even try to address those students' needs, whether they feel belonged to us, to our schools, to our community. And it'll take a village approach to do this. It's nothing of rocket science. It takes all of us. It takes the church. It takes the schools. It takes families stepping up. And I think we see a lot of that, Nathan. We see more families getting involved now. There was a time that they said, it's the school's job. Call me when it's 3:30 and I can pick up my kid. Or put them on a bus and they'll be a latchkey kid. We see a huge shift right now in parents that are more involved in curriculum, in instruction, in assessment. And because we're making decisions without them that we've always made the past few decades in this district. They haven't been at the table because they didn't want to be sometimes. Now they want to be, and we're shifting that communication to be more inclusive of all parties, right? And we don't want to be more divisive. We don't want to be top-heavy government. You will do this, dictate, mandate. No, now, yeah, it paints a picture when you do put a mask on a kid that you're mandating it. But, hey, that's not the same concept, or that's not the same mandate as we're going to teach your kid this, okay? It's more inclusive, and we need it to be more inclusive. We need parents at the table. And I think you're seeing that in board meetings. I think you're seeing that in your churches, in public.
That is for
People
sure.
want to be more inclusive.
And they have been, and they're coming. I don't know if they're coming to you. That's what I'm just kind of asking you for that. But teachers especially, but a lot of parents, and they're just saying, they're asking me, us, I guess the church, whatever, for help. And that's why I so appreciate this kind of conversation to help me get informed and maybe, give us some guidance and to expose some things that are good and expose some things that we're concerned about. And so that's really good. One of the things, go ahead, Nathan, do you have another?
No, I truly appreciate that. I appreciate that explanation, Jim, very much. I know that, and I believe what you were appealing to a few minutes ago was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And
Absolutely.
That's understanding that children, obviously, if they have not eaten a good breakfast in the morning, it's very difficult to focus on math in the afternoon. And so obviously that social and emotional piece is very important. One of the things it feels like that has changed in recent years is obviously social and emotional learning is naturally imbued with moral meaning. And I believe that what many parents are concerned about are new moral narratives that they're hearing sometimes for the first time. And I think what's happened over the last year is more people have become aware of these new moral narratives. And some of them teach that teach their children, for instance, very, very dark thoughts at an earlier age than what they were taught in the past. Obviously, as an adult, we grow into a place of knowledge where you see a whole spectrum of things. We even recognize that when it comes to MPAA ratings in movies. We don't expect that a 7-year-old would be held at the same place as a 13-year-old, or the high ratings that are high, the R ratings and other things that we see. We see that people graduate socially and emotionally through time. And I think what we're watching parents get concerned about is the fact that it seems that in some of the books that children are taught at an early age that they would be racist by default, otherwise known as systemic racism, or that they are going to be thinking thoughts of very dark suicidal ideation and other things at an earlier and earlier age. And so when it comes to social emotional learning, I think what people are concerned with is how that particular understanding that's been long held since Maslow came up with those hierarchy of needs, that it's changing in recent years, and we're starting to find it even in reading programs. I'll tell you, this is very interesting. C.S. Lewis in 1943, at the height of World War II, the war was at its peak at that point. It would get worse, but he went forward to the University of Durham and delivered a series of lectures. And in those lectures, he began to point out the fact that at that time they were not paying enough attention to what was being taught in elementary school textbooks. And his point was, even back then, that there were new books at the time, that the idea that there was no objective truth, it was being slowly inserted, but in reading programs, in how to read a poem, and that it was all subjective to the student and that there was no objective reality. I think that what we're concerned with today is something that relates very much to what C.S. Lewis was pointing at all that time passed, that when it comes to social and emotional learning, this is now being baked into school textbooks. And so we just want to be very cautious. And that's the reason I'm asking, whenever we look at this, we just want to make sure that as we're inclusive, we're not inclusive only of one perspective, that we're inclusive also of those that do hold that objective reality and truth is there, that our children's innocence needs to be protected, and that is secured for the next generation, and that they learn at the right pace, not too early, that the world is as brutal as it sometimes can be.
Thank you for sharing that, Nathan. And I agree with you 100% that we need to make sure that we're keeping children and not trying to help them or make them grow up any faster than has been our norm. However, we live in an information age. We've been living that way for decades, where information is flying through phones faster than we know that's getting to kids. And we're trying to meet the needs of those students. So when, and a few of you know this, but my wife and I adopted 2 children from China and 1 from Ethiopia, a young man. And that's where I got my tie that I wore today of stained glass. It's all of the churches, the Christian churches, and their stained glass in Ethiopia.
Nice.
At their major churches. And I wear this today for symbolic, because I'm here. And it's on my mind all the time, is that when I'm raising my son and he's going to school and hearing the N-word, where is that coming from? It's not coming from him. He doesn't know what that meant, because he's coming from Ethiopia, that everybody's like him. But he's coming into a new world where very few are like him. And so he's hearing and assimilating, trying to assimilate into a culture and understand, why are people calling me this now? Did I hurt them? Did I do something to them? And that's that part of social learning that he's grappling with and can't get to reading, can't get to speaking or listening or math. And neither can those kids, because now they are feeling, did I hurt you in some way? And that social learning in a real place that I went through with my son in junior high. Hey, I heard you're a good basketball player because you can steal the ball, and you can run away from us. And that's what you're good at. They stereotyped him because of his skin color. They need to understand that there's a stereotype that's wrong within our culture. Okay, my daughter's from Asia. The same thing. The dog was walking across the greenway, and they were out on the field in PE. And they said, hey, does that dog make you hungry? Well, there's a stereotype there that's unfair to them because they never grew up in that.
Someone said that to her?
Yes.
What grade is this?
This is in junior high.
Junior high. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And they've lived here for, 6-7 years.
Oh,
and
gosh.
so trying to teach students how to interact socially, of how that would make that person feel, and why that was wrong to say that, even though you said it as a joke. Yeah. You didn't mean to hurt them. You just didn't know any better. Right. And that's that part of that social construct, that learning that we're trying to teach, so they can go beyond our majority in Cheyenne of whiteness, of Caucasian, and be successful in the world, to say, oh, there's a bigger world out there than just Cheyenne, Wyoming. And we are in the minority. in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in the world, in a perspective. And so we need to appreciate different cultures and different religions.
For sure. No question about
and
that.
so that's that social construct that we're trying at an age-appropriate level.
Right.
No, we didn't teach that at second grade because it wasn't happening.
But that's one of the concerns that we have, because that one book that I can't think of the name of it, it's about the Mexican family that moved in.
Yes.
They were treated horribly.
Yes.
It says,
absolutely.
Do you remember the name of that book? Separate but equal. Okay.
Yes.
They were treated horribly, but this is a first grade book, and it leaves you with the idea that all white people say these things. I guarantee you, all white people don't say. Right. Those are horrible things.
It is.
And I'm sorry. That's sinful man, right? That is, and it's horrible. And I'm so sorry for that. I'm so sorry for this Mexican
the chaos, right? But there's order too. There's good.
Well, but this is the concern about the way that this book leaves you, that one that I'm talking about, first grade book, leaves you with, man, if you're white, you are this way, or it's shameful. It's like you're ashamed of being white or whatever. It's like, you should be ashamed of being sinful. Those are sinful acts. And I don't identify with, we talked about this one time. I don't identify with the 1960s and saying the blacks couldn't eat at the table. I think that's pathetic. That's sinful man. And the Civil War and some of there's no one ever talks about the fact that hundreds of thousands of people died to free slavery, right? And that's the other side of the equation that I think, I don't know if Nathan was saying this, but this is what my concern is. It's all loaded to the dark, the negative, the hurtful, the ugly, the American Indian, how that was treated. There's some horrible acts that we can talk about. There's some virtuous things, and that gain is not being talked about. I don't see that anywhere. In fact, you showed me one book, and that one was actually pretty good. The Bud, not Buddy.
Yes.
And I appreciate that. So had some more virtuous, but it was more of him coming through just hardships after hardship after hardship, which is heartbreaking. But the whole idea, and I think one of the things when we left that one time, we talked about one of the reasons there's this vitriol, especially with race, is that we've had all of this stuff hitting us in the face, that, just racial tension, and it's thrown in our face that because you're white, you think this way. And it's like, man, I don't. I am sickened by some of the things we see. And in anything that I've ever personally done to try to bridge those gaps of diversity, it's like we just continue to tear down. And when I see it in these books in the first grade, it's like it leaves you with the idea that I don't know how a first grader is going to sort this out. It's like looks like all white people do these bad things to Mexican people. It's like that's not true. And it's pathetic, but that's what you're left with. And that's my concern. Sure. But that's what I want parents to know. It's like, guys, you're going to have to be able to see this and take and talk and call out, this is sinful. This is a sinful act, and it's despicable. What happened to your daughters? And I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The Separate But Equal book is a wonderful book, by the way. It is in the second grade Wit and Wisdom, core text for students to read. We took that through the process as a committee of about 50 people to see, is this age appropriate for our second graders to read and to try to understand?
And you really think second graders can pull apart those concepts?
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
Okay, that's what I want to hear.
Our committee dissected that book, looked at the vocabulary, looked at the context of that legal precedent that was set during that time. It's a true story.
Oh, for sure, it's a true story. It's pathetic. It's that they were treated this way.
They were told they couldn't go to that school. Yeah. They had to go to the Mexican school. And so that court precedent took place. Is it appropriate for a second grader to understand that? Probably not. So our committee said, let's not teach this book.
Oh.
Let's put it off.
Okay.
Let's make it available. We're not going to ban the book. We're not going to burn the book, because it's such a great piece of text and piece of history of our American history.
So is that one that you've pulled out of Wit and Wisdom?
Correct. That's one that we've
That's good to hear.
That we've taken out of that second grade teacher's hands, and we've said, let's wait on this book. But let's teach when we teach the civil rights.
As an administrator,
much later.
As an administrator, though, doesn't it make you kind of question Wit and Wisdom's wisdom of why would they put that in? That's not you guys doing it. That's somebody thought about putting this into a second grader's hand. And that's what bothers me about, you talk about trust. It's like, when I see some of this stuff, and I know you guys inherited this Wit and Wisdom. It's not that you went out and I want the world to know that.
Right.
But
I've been on the job 4 months too. So.
Yeah, right. And you've inherited these issues, and that's why you're so kind to come in here and let us vent a little bit, or let us air out all our frustrations of
Sure.
But for me, the trust of Wit and Wisdom is like, wow, you guys, how did you think this was a good idea?
Mm-hmm.
And then driving home that acting out that being buried and thinking about dying. How, why do you think that's a good idea?
Well, and as, we talked about last time, especially in our cultural shift. I mean, the last 2 years, things have always happened as far as race and social economics. That's been there. We've fought against it, but here in the last 2 years, it's just like there's been this dramatic pivot where we're all sensitive, and so I think that was our concern too, was timing. Where, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we would have some concerns, but here in the last 18 months, the way things have come down, we're just ultra sensitive. I don't even want to say ultra.
I think you're right.
We're just more tender. We want to make sure that we're represented correctly. We want to make sure our children have great opportunities. And I think that was our question too, is like the timing of this. It just feels really a little off.
Yeah.
Well, and you speak of timing, and that's when we looked to adopt this, and we had the 45-day review with the board. Everybody got a chance to check this out. It wasn't on their minds. It didn't occur to them to, oh yeah, let's read these books. There's 150 core texts. I wonder what they are, before we adopted it. We put it out there for 45 days, like we do every curriculum adoption. That's in our policies. And we thought we had a robust understanding throughout the community of, well, not everybody has time to read their children's books of 150.
That's exactly right.
And
it takes time. I've done a lot of reading in the last 2 months.
And in our process of understanding what's in the curriculum, aligned to standards, is it age appropriateness? That's our whole review of the curriculum right now. We go through an adoption review, and it's ongoing. We started it last year as soon as the books and all the teacher manuals and training came into place. And we have that mechanism in place, that internal mechanism to say, is this appropriate for our district? Is it going to move the needle of reading achievement? Now, I don't want to get hung up on content or one book, because I have a bigger vision. I want all students literate. I want all students to read on grade level or higher, so they can be college and career ready by the time they're graduating from us. And so that's my vision. And I don't want to get hung up on, is this book appropriate at second grade? Because it's a great book, but it may not fit the needs of a second grader right now. It may fit the needs of a fifth grade civics lesson.
One of the things that I got to be a good steward of this question from a teacher. So this is a question, and I will tell you, this has come from more than one teacher. Okay. And it fits our context here. Can teachers deviate and use different texts on their own? Can they take this, like, you know what, I am uncomfortable teaching this. Can they deviate from that?
So they will have that voice when they come to the book and try to teach it. Right now, unless they know the book and have tried to teach with it, there's that misunderstanding, misalignment. Is this from this program? Is this aligned to the standards? What intimately is wrong with this book? And so that's that ongoing survey that we send to all teachers, every month, to say, give us the feedback on these books, each grade level. We have coaches, curriculum directors, myself.
So they can't go and substitute a book in. They think this one is really dark. It has a heavy theme. It's got suicide ideation, whatever it might be. And they can't say, well, this is another one that they know of because they've been like you've taught forever. You know of a good book that has that accentuates virtues. Can they do that?
So there's a process for them to challenge that. To say, hey, I have questions about this book. Am I alone? Am I one fifth grade teacher at one elementary in this whole district that has this question? And that's why we put out the feedback forms. We want the feedback from them to say, hey, take a look at this page. Take a look at this concept. I'm questioning it. Are there others? And so we're gathering that information, and then we'll make it happen. But as an
individual teacher, they couldn't just go pluck that one out.
Well, we'd like feedback from them on why first.
On why, for sure.
Yeah.
I understand.
We don't want them making those autonomous decisions, because there's concern when they do that. for the whole district. We want this aligned for our district to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all students.
But, you know, there's some stuff that's pretty dark. There's a 5th grade book that talks about this demonic creature, and it really goes through it in quite detail. It's like, I can understand why. And I had 2 different separate teachers come up, and this was what they asked me to pray about. They said, I am really struggling teaching this book. And I wish I could think of it. It's
Ramayana?
That's it. Yeah, it's a classic book. I get it. It's classic. But
it's a classic
it's
tale.
dark.
It's a classic tale in the Hindu religion. And we study different religions and ancient civilizations throughout. What this book aims to do, because it's an adaptation from a classic epic novel type of in the Hindu religion, and what it aims to do is teach certain aspects of that culture. It does start out with, here is the antagonist. He is a demon.
Yeah, yeah.
He
the
is
tin-headed
from
monster.
the depths of hell.
Yeah, and
Right?
he's done all these meditations and all. So
Correct. He has 10 heads, and
But if a teacher had, because you could see why some teachers are like, man, I am really struggling to teach this. Could they say, here's another equal book instead of that one?
Yes. So we need to be careful about that, because there's some folks that may be from India, and that this is a classic tale from their heritage, to say, what's the deeper meaning beyond the antagonist, beyond the Voldemort of Harry Potter that people don't believe in, right? Who is that antagonist, and what is the good that overcomes this evil? What is the good that overcomes this chaos, the order? And as the tale unfolds, and as this beautiful illustrated book paints the picture.
Well, okay, so the woman goes in and is cremated, right, in this fire. That was her purity. I don't know. It's bizarre. It's a bizarre book.
Well, see,
Go ahead.
this is part of the question there, Galen.
I
if
don't
might
quite understand
inter-
this.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, if I might interject, I think one can sense, though, as this conversation has turned in this new direction, that there is a lot of moral meaning that is more deeply imbued with this new approach that's come up with social emotional learning. And one of the reasons why back in 2015, when in the legislature we were talking about this and our interactions with federal standards, that there was some concern with, okay, is the school system moving in a direction that historically has been reserved for other spheres of society? Now, yes, education always involves some sort of moral meaning, but it began to approach a whole new pathway. And I think that's the reason why parents are beginning to take notice. It takes a while, obviously. Most people are just working hard, taking care of the issues in front of them and so on, and hoping that what their kids are getting in their education is just a classic American education. And yet there is a new conversation. And I think that's the reason why, as we see this new content come in time past, things like Harry Potter, well, that was a discretionary choice from a parent for their children. And so on, schools could pick it up. And yes, it was very popular. But when it becomes baked into the required textbook or reading material, and teachers are told, you're going to need to read this, and these are the questions you're going to ask, here's the content, and it's no longer a choice, but rather it is part of the actual curriculum, things take on a whole new meaning. And that's why this conversation is so important.
Yeah. Well, and I apologize, Jim. My frustration is not pointed at you, but my frustration is these are strong religious themes that are not anywhere close to a virtuous religious theme. And that it frustrates me anyway, the part that it's required is probably the best way to say that. So I apologize for my frustration, but it's like, man, This is a 5th grader. It's like, I guess what it tells me, this is what shows me, Jim, is I feel like this is where we, the Christian, we've lost this argument. We don't have that we can have a book like that and that's the baked into our, it's more discouraging for me personally, I guess. And so I apologize for my frustration.
Yeah, but you raise a great point, is that we've taught the Crusades. We've taught different points in our history, not only our state's history, our nation's history, our world history. And this is a piece of somebody's culture in the world that paints the picture for their culture, to have an appreciation and understanding of a different viewpoint. And to balance that in one's head is a higher level of thinking. There's a rigor there of intellectualism that a student can appreciate. And when I was in that 6th grade classroom and that teacher was delivering that first 15 pages of the Ramayana in the 6th grade, I took a look at those faces, because I taught 6th grade for many years. Yeah. And I've been in elementary schools. Not one student batted an eye. And they said, this is make-believe. This is like Harry Potter. I'm going to take this symbolism and I'm going to try to apply it to what is karma. Yeah. Where did karma come from? And why is it important? Why does people say, oh, it's karma? Well, that story tells what karma is. Yeah. And so that's just a little bit in the weeds of the Ramayana.
Yeah, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one, and I appreciate your view on it. Galileo, that whole book, and you talk about those images. There's people hanging from the walls. This is like a 2nd or 3rd grade book, I think.
Star Messenger,
and probably a classic again. I get it, but it's dark, and I know of kids that wake up in the middle of the night because they watch Scooby-Doo on cartoons. There's some images in that Starry Messenger. It's like, wow, that would frighten a 7-year-old, 8-year-old. And even the images, and let alone the story behind it and the whole thing, it really discredits the church and all that. So I'm not crazy about that personally, but the images are. I guess what our final thing here is this: I hope this process of being able to flag some books. And you said that they have one you mentioned, and I really appreciate that that one was mentioned. How many books have been flagged so far? Do you know?
We've read approximately 80 books as the committee. Okay. And
you're on the committee.
I'm the ultimate.
You're the last guy on the committee.
Yes, I take it to our cabinet and that's good to know. We say, here's the decision. Do you agree or not agree? All right. But I leave it up to those 50 people because they are doing the work. They're having the discussion. I'm kind of removed to make sure, was the process followed? We're all voices at the table. Did Mrs. Smith from Afflerbach get a chance to chime in? Was this parent from Prairie Wind there, 10 miles away? Was she there to give her input? And so I'm more of in charge of the process rather than the actual determination of yes or no.
How many books have been pulled, I guess, and can we know which ones those are?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And how do we know that?
So right now, what we did was separate but equal. We actually sent a memo to all the principals and teachers to say, we'd like this is up for a challenge. Here's the process that was followed. We had another book of seahorses that had a graphic image in it.
I know that book.
Yeah, that the committee felt maybe a bit too mature for students to understand.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
That's a good call.
And so we're taking those books and saying, we don't think there's anything wrong with that book. We're just saying
age appropriate.
Yeah. Is there a better way for students to understand the bigger picture and learn how to read without getting into the weeds of that one image or...
Kudos to you. That's good.
That's what that committee's trying to do.
Yeah, good for you.
And so we're taking a look. Right now, we're 80 plus books into this process. Okay. And we have flagged a few books to say, how can we reteach this? Because we can't just not teach that standard. Yeah. Okay. And when we're using the curriculum now, we have to make sure we're addressing the standard by state law. And then getting to, well, how can we replace this? How can we alter the lesson so kids don't get stuck on this image or this word, or they have maybe a student with a high ACEs score, trauma in their life, and it re-image that trauma of domestic violence, of something.
I would put my vote in for Starry, whatever Messenger. That has some dark images. I mean, it's got demonic stuff in it. There's serpents.
Sure.
Well, people hanging from the side. I was like, why is this and this?
And I'll also tell you that the book, although there are things in it that you can't argue with, but there are things that you can. Every book is like that, right? And
age appropriate.
Yeah, age appropriate.
I just keep bringing it back, man.
But it's
you can
interesting.
teach that at a different level, but age appropriate is second grade. It's
Right.
like you're gonna Scooby-Doo scares kids.
And we were listening to some teachers talk about Starry Messenger the other night, and what their biggest concern was not the content, but how it's written. It's in cursive. Students can't read cursive. Why? Because we dropped it from our standards in the state. We don't require students to use cursive anymore. Did you know that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And so they can't read the cursive handwriting. And many parents say, I don't care about that book. Why can't my kid read this?
But
why don't you teach cursive anymore?
You bring up something that's really important,
Right.
and I want to drive this home because I don't, we may disagree. We've had some disagreements even here about what's in and what's out. And I affirm the two that you did and applaud you. Thank you. And I think there's probably some others. But some parents are going to say, I don't see a problem with any of it.
Sure.
Some are going to say, I see a problem with every bit of it. I just want to reiterate what my role personally is to say, okay, you need to be involved. You need to see what your kids are reading and just know. It's like, well, is this something that you need to be able to make those decisions? Absolutely. One of the things that we talked about, there's this video and that helped me understand it. This group is called Moms for Liberty. It's called Let's Talk About Wit and Wisdom #2, and we're going to have it on the screen. It's a YouTube thing. I think you guys told me you had seen it and watched it, but it basically goes through every book that has probably some of the 80 that are on your desk and some of the concerns and why they're concerns. I think it's very thoughtful. It's not like trying to bash anything. So this is what we see here. This is a concern, and so parents can go through, and in that way they can at least have the Reader's Digest version, and then they can watch it and say, I think I should probably read that one for myself. And if they decide to say, hey, my kid's good with this, or they're good with their kid reading this, that's fine. If they're not, they need to know. I think that'd be a great way to kind of get the Reader's Digest version. You can do that in that Let's Talk Wit and Wisdom 2. Final closing thoughts. Any of you guys?
Well, I was going to ask, when are you going to assess the kids? When are you going to know whether this curriculum has been successful, or maybe you need to rethink it? What's the process for knowing whether our kids are hitting the standard?
Yes, great question. So every year we have our state test coming out. It's called YTOP, and we use that as one of our measures. That is across all of our state in Wyoming, that every public school administer YTOP. So we're doing that again in April and May. And we also have interim assessments that YTOP has in the fall and the winter that we use. But we also have a robust curriculum assessment package. So with Wit and Wisdom, there are assessments that go along with that to make sure it's aligning with our standards. Our students are learning the standards. So that's embedded in the program. That's why it's comprehensive, that we don't have to go out and purchase another assessment program. But we also have above that something more removed from that called FastBridge. And FastBridge is an assessment we use to screen our students to see where they may have difficulties reading, how we can get them in some intervention if they're below grade level. And so we do have a robust assessment system as well. And that falls under my department, so I know a lot about that. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with that, just because that's a whole nother podcast, I'm sure.
Well, I hope that's an open invitation to do this again, Jim, because I tell you, I appreciate it. I know our people are going to appreciate it, and you've brought a lot of clarity to your world, and I know it's tough, and I appreciate your role of trying to balance it. You've got a lot of opinions to balance. I fully understand that.
Well,
so I appreciate you.
Just one thing before closing, it really is a community approach. We live in a community of Cheyenne that we have to understand and appreciate each other's views, and we can't do that behind closed doors. And it takes a team approach. It takes a village, and we all need to work together for our students, because they're going through a lot right
They
now,
are.
a lot they have never experienced,
right.
or us as adults have experienced
Right.
in our generations growing up. And so I think they're managing their best. They're very resilient. I was in classrooms yesterday, and they're thinking, and they're challenging each other in unique ways intellectually, but also behaviorally. And we have to understand that there's an affective side to student-child development. And we have to meet those needs as well, for each child to be prepared to learn, whether it be food or whether it be socially or emotionally, or do they have that family structure in place that we need to honor and support. And then, by golly, then we can get to the good stuff of reading and writing, listening and speaking, getting them prepared for life.
Fair enough. Nathan, any final thoughts, words?
Yes, sir. Well, I just want to add my appreciation as well for this dialogue, because we've had the opportunity really to look at how our children will be raised. And, it takes a village. There's another model that says it takes the family. And I think what a lot of parents are doing is they're looking into the equation right now and saying that, these children have been given to us by God. We care very much about them. And so we want to get more involved in that role rather than see that purely as a governmental role or a village role. And so as parents get more involved, I'm so thankful that they're having the opportunity to be heard more. And this has been a very constructive dialogue, and I'm very thankful to take part in it. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to visit with you all.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your terribly busy day, and I don't even want to tell everybody where you're at. So I appreciate the fact that you've taken time from your vacation to join us, Nathan, and God bless you, brother. And as we end every podcast, I'm going to end this one the same way, is to challenge everyone to be strong and very courageous. God bless you all. Thanks.